आइए पढ़ें अंबेडकर को। और आज की इस कड़ी में हम राउंड टेबल कॉन्फ्रेंस का पढ़ने जा रहे हैं भाग 4 पार्ट 4। और अब तक हमने राउंड टेबल कॉन्फ्रेंस के पार्ट 1, 2, 3 पढ़ चुके हैं और इसका वीडियो आप डॉक्टर अंजू यूट्यूब चैनल पर देख सकते हैं। काइंडली मेरा चैनल सब्सक्राइब करें, शेयर करें, फॉलो करें और अंबेडकर को पढ़ने के लिए ज़रूर चैनल को बार बार सुने। देखिए, गवर्नमेंट टू बी, और जो भाग 4 है, पार्ट 4 है, उसका टाइटल है गवर्नमेंट टू बी रिस्पॉन्सिबल टू सोसाइटी एज अ होल थ्रू एडल्ट सफरेज। सब कमिटी नंबर 6 ऑन फ्रेंचाइज, सेकेंड सिटिंग ऑन 2 दिसंबर 1930। अब इसमें एक वर्ड यूज आया है SUFFRAGE। इसको सुफ्रिज बोलते हैं और इसका मतलब होता है राइट टू वोट, आपको वोट देने का अधिकार हो। मैं पढ़ना शुरू करती हूँ। It seems to me that there are only 2 important questions which this roundtable conference is going to consider. One question is whether India should have responsible government, and the second question is what people that government should be responsible. In the plenary session, we all joined in one chorus in demanding that India should have a responsible form of government. And I, for one, speaking on behalf of depressed classes, in that plenary session, joined with my friends sitting opposite in demanding responsible government for India. When I did so, however, I was under the impression that the Indian people who came to represent their country at the Roundtable Conference were not only united in making a demand for responsible government for India, but we were also united in the view as to whom that government should be responsible. I'm sorry to say, sir, that I have been deluded. I find now that although some of our people would desire me and others to join them in their hands for demand status, dominion status, they do not join with us in demanding that government which will be set up under the dominion, that dominion status shall be responsible to the people of India as a whole. I never thought there would be this division of opinion and that I should have to stand up to defend the position we take. Now, sir, speaking on behalf of depressed classes, I cannot honestly consent to responsible government or the dominion status unless I can be ensured that the people whom I speak are to have a place in that constitution. I must make that fact plain to all my friends, as an objection has been raised to the proposal for adult suffrage by some of my friends. I propose to deal with the argument brought forward against it. One of the arguments brought forward was that we should follow the percent laid down in this country, that adult suffrage should be reached by states. It is suggested that we should follow the stages adopted in this country from 1832 to 1918. Those who take their stand on the political history of enfranchisement in this country seem to think that there was some philosophical course of action thought out by English people in devising the step that were taken by them in enfranchisement the people from 1832 onward, that they had decided beforehand that they must enfranchise only a limited number of people in 1832, that otherwise it would be philosophically wrong, that they should take the next step only in 1867 and not in 1866, that they should take the next step in 1884 and not in 1867. I do not know whether those who use that argument believe that there was any philosophic belief behind that fact. But I should like to point out to my friends, those who base their argument upon this fact, that if you read the political history of England, you will find that not only was there no philosophical belief which determined the stages that were taken by British people, but the question of franchise was treated in this country as a mere matter of party politics, that each party tried to extend the franchise because it thought that as a political catchword, it would influence and augment that party. Perhaps that will be news to my friend who used that argument, and I must say always uses it with satisfaction to himself, feeling that he is placing an insuperable obstacle in our path. We will be perhaps pleased to find that one of the greatest steps in the political enfranchisement of the people of England was taken by a conservative government in this country and not by the liberals or the radical. The second thing I should like to point out to my friends is this. Does he really mean to tell us that because the franchise in this country was limited, that therefore the government produced under that franchise was a good government? If the government, the object of which was welfare of the people and the prosperity of the masses, is that the inference he wants to draw from that fact that because the franchise was limited and therefore there was no trouble and everybody was satisfied in this country? Surely that is not the case. If my friends will only take the trouble of reading the life of Lord Shaftesbury and the social and political history of England, he will certainly find that the unreformed parliament was not a blessing to anyone. Thirdly, I should like to point out to my friends, if he really is serious and he really believes that he says that the people of India ought not be given adult suffrage because they are not fit for it, for that only alternative for this is to go back to India and not to demand dominion status or responsible government for that. Surely, if it is the view of the gentleman who puts forward this case that the Indian people are not fit to exercise the franchise, are not fit to take up themselves the responsibility of government. Thirdly, I should like to point out to my friend, if he really is serious and if he really believes what he says, that the people of India ought not to be given adult suffrage because they are not fit for it, that the only alternative for him is to go back to India and not to demand dominion status or responsible government. For surely, if it is the view of the gentleman who puts forward this case that the Indian people are not fit to exercise the franchise, are not fit to take up the responsibilities of government, then I do not understand in whose name he asks for responsible government. Is it for this class? Is it for himself? For whom it is? The only argument that I understand in favor of responsible government and in favor of dominion status is the assumption which must constitute the basis of any such argument, that the people of India are fit to undertake the responsibility of government. If my friend does not believe that the Indian people are capable of exercising that responsibility, then the only conclusion is that the Indian people cannot have dominion status and cannot have responsibility. The second argument that was brought forward was that although adult suffrage may be in denial, it cannot be brought into effect at the present moment because he was not the machinery to give effect to it. Now, I have great sympathy with that argument, but I should like to point out that there are considerations in the opposition to that view. Let us understand what this franchise does really mean. Surely the franchise does not mean a mere matter of ballot box, does not mean a mere matter of polling booth and the placing of polling officers there. The franchise means something more vital than that. Now, sir, as I understand it, to me, the suffrage and the franchise are nothing else but the right of self-defense. It means that you will create a legislature which will have the amplest power of passing laws which will affect the life, liberty and property of the people. Surely, if that is going to be the position, if your legislature is going to have power of affecting your life in the most vital matter, then surely every individual who is going to be subject to that legislation ought to have the power to defend himself against laws which will probably in circumstances invalid his liberty, invade his life and his property. It is not a mere question of the ballot box, it is not a mere question of polling booths. May I put it in a different way? If I understand the franchise, I understand to be the right to regulate the terms of what one might call associated life in society. That is the essence of the franchise. When you give a man the franchisee, what you mean is that you give him power to regulate the term on which he will live in relationship with other individuals in society. Now, if that is the meaning of suffrage, surely you can't give the higher classes, the intellectuals as they are called, or the properties classes, the power to regulate the term of associated life and leave the lower classes at their mercy too. They must have the power to regulate the terms of associated life, just as the capitalist must have the power, if he is to have any constitution, to dictate how he shall live on terms of associated life with the labor. Surely the labor is entitled also to have the power to regulate the term on which he shall live with his capitalist master. It can't be one-sided bargain. It must not be one-sided bargain. If you understand the franchisee in the right sense of the word, then it seems to me the franchisee is something which must be regarded as the inherent right of every individual in society. And if you understand that the franchisee is the inherent right of every man or woman who is capable of understanding it, then surely you cannot make an inherent right of people dependent upon the convenience of your administration. My friend used the argument that we must not have adult suffrage because we shall not have polling booth and polling officers. I should like to remind him of what would be the situation if he were told that he had been wronged by an individual, that he had a good case which, if he brought it to the court, would certainly succeed, but that he could not be given address because he had not sufficient judge in the high court. How would he like that position? Surely, if the franchisee in an inherent right, and if there are administrative difficulties in the effectuation of that franchisee, then the remedy is not to curtail the franchisee, but the remedy is to provide the necessary machinery so that every man or woman capable of enjoying that franchisee shall be in a position to give effect to it. Sir, it seems to me that difficulties of administering the franchisee which have been placed before us arisen from two different sources. We are told that constituencies in India are very vast, and surely, as we see from report of the Simon Commission, they are of most fabulous character. It is said that if you increase the number of electors in the existing constituencies as they exist today, the whole machinery will break down. My submission to this conference is this: surely this difficulty can easily be met. It seems to me this difficulty can be met in this way. It seems to me that the difficulty arises largely because of the composition and the strength of your legislative council today. That imposition is so very limited that you cannot help having the larger constituency that you have today. It seems to me that from the standpoint of the members, the existing strength of the legislature in the provinces is ridiculous. Let us have the figures for a moment before our mind's eye. I find on comparison that Madras, Bengal and Great United Provinces have more or less the same population as France, Great Britain and Italy. The Madras Legislative Council consists of 132 members. The Bengal Legislative Council consists of 140 members. On the other hand, and the United Province Legislative Council consists of the Madras Legislative Council consists of 132 members. The Bengal Legislative Council consists of 140 members, and the United Province Legislative Council consists of 123 members. On the other hand, France has a lower chamber which consists of 626 members. Great Britain has somewhere over 600 and Italy has over 560 members. Take on the other hand Bombay and the Punjab, which are more or less on a par in the matter of population. Bombay has 114 members and the Punjab has 94. Bombay and Punjab are more or less equal in population to Spain. If you take the lower chamber in Spain, you find it consists of 417 members. I know it is not existence now, but that is another matter. It is a matter of constitution. In France, it is in existence with a large number. Then take the central province in which the Legislative Council has 73 members. I find that the population of the central province is equal to that of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia has 313 members. Assam has 53 members in population. It is equal to Portugal, and the Portugal has 146 members. Now surely if you are going to cramp these vast aggregations of people into Legislative Council which do not exceed 140 in membership, you are bound as a result to have very large constituencies. Why are you afraid of increasing the number of legislatures? I cannot understand it. If you are not afraid and you follow the parallel in other countries, then surely you can very easily reduce the size of electorates and thereby remove one of the difficulties that is said to exist in matter of adult suffrage. Then another difficulty which was pointed out, that it was said we should not have a sufficient number of polling officers. Now that difficulty to my mind also does not seem to be of a very serious character. It seems to me that if all the college students in India could be drafted into the service of electoral department, this difficulty would be very easily solved. Some of my friends on the other side laugh at it, but I do not know why. I know as a matter of fact that in the census of all college students and the school boys also help the census department in carrying on the enumerations. If, for instance, the same system were adopted on the polling day, if all the college students were asked to help in this matter, and I have not the slightest doubt that they would come to the rescue of the department, then surely we should have more polling officers than we need on the occasion of this sort. It seems to me, therefore, that the difficulties of the situation are not insuperable. Let me point out to my friends opposite who object to adult suffrage on this ground. It seems to me their position of a somewhat curious character, where a member of the British delegation raises a difficulty and says there are heaps of difficulties in the way of India, and therefore India must have a dominion status for responsible government. The gentleman sitting opposite would allow the English gentleman to take advantage of difficulties. They would tell him at once, "Why, you bluster up difficulties to put down our claim, these difficulties which surely can be met." Let me tell him that we on this side are also not prepared to allow you to take advantage of this difficulty. If we say that if there are difficulties in the way of getting the power in our hands, those difficulties ought to be solved, we are not going to let you have the advantage of the situation. So far, I have dealt with the argument which have been presented against adult suffrage. Now let me put on one or two arguments which I think are in favor of adult suffrage and which in my opinion are more or less decisive. The first argument that I will put in this, that you cannot have in India any system of suffrage, sort of adult suffrage, which will give equality of representation to all the castes and communities in India. There is no such system you can devise for India which will give that result. Take for instance the existence of constituencies in Bengal and in Punjab that Mohammedans form a majority of population. You have in Sindh also, as apart from Bombay, the Mohammedans in a majority. Now what is the state of Mohammedan community in these provinces? I am putting this as a feeler. My Mohammedan friends may take their stand apart from this. I am putting it in a case, as a case. What is the position of the Mohammedan community in these provinces under the system of franchises that we have today? The Mohammedans in the Sindh form something like 70% of the population, and yet if I am not very mistaken, their voting strength is only 49%. Take for instance again Bengal and Punjab. There are the Mohammedans predominate in population, and yet in voting list they are in the minority. Take again the depressed classes. Under the existing franchise, they are now nowhere at all in these electorate. I think it is most disgraceful thing to have a franchisee of this sort. You have to remember one thing, that Indian society is composed of so many castes and creeds, and those castes and creeds are not related to each other in what one might call the vertical perpendicular, so that if you chop off this mass at any particular point, you get a part which is representative of all the communities in an equal degree. On the other hand, if I may put it so, you are related in such a matter that the parallel grains are, so to speak, placed horizontally one on the other, so that if you chop at any particular point, you get a part which is representative of one single community only, or at the most two, and the rest are not presented at all. Now surely you do not want to create a system of political government in which only some caste and some communities will predominate. Surely you do not want to create in India a South Africa where only some people will have the vote and the rest will not. I say, if you are interested in giving every man a vote, in giving every man the political franchise so that he may work out his destiny, then you cannot have any system of franchise in India than that of adult suffrage. Now, let me give you another example. As I say, I am not opposed to female suffrage, and I am very obliged to our lady colleagues, Mrs. Subramaniam, for supporting us in this matter. I will go with her wholeheartedly. Let me point out one or two illustrations of what has been suggested by way of enlarging and broadening the franchise. It is suggested that there should be a franchisee of literacy. I do not propose to call it a fancy franchisee, but let me tell you what will be effect of it. The effect of it would be this, that some communities would have their voting strength almost double, while the other communities would stand where they are. Literacy in this India is so unevenly distributed that some communities would have all the increase of franchise added to their stock, while other communities would remain where they are. Surely you do not want to create that sort of situation. Therefore, my submission is that if this conference and the members who are assembled around this table are true to their creed, believe that India must have responsible government and that government must be responsible to the people, then I submit there is no alternative to adult suffrage. Then, sir, there is one more consideration that I would like to point out that seems to me to be the most decisive consideration in this matter. We all of us know that the question of joint versus separate electorate is most thorny question. It seems to me to be a very crucial question. May I point out to this conference that, at least in my opinion, the question of joint versus separate electorate is inextricably bound up with the question of franchise. You will not ask any minority in India, you will not compel any minority in India, and you will not get the consent of any minority in India to agree to join electorates unless that minority has adult suffrage. I am not going to place myself under the thumb and authority of any majority government unless I am certain that I can exercise in elections electoral power which is commensurate with my social power. Unless I know that every man and every woman in this depressed class community will be able to exercise the vote and to determine the destiny of the candidate who is going to represent the mass of people in this country, I certainly am not going to consent to join electorate. Certainly not. I am not going to place myself in a minority position. I am not going to allow the majority to select my candidate. No, under no circumstances. And I think that is true of my minority, may also be true of Mohammedans. I do not wish to say something that I shall have to say in another community. But the point is so relevant that I cannot help making a reference. You cannot in fairness ask the Mohammedans of Bengal or Punjab to accept joint electorates unless you place them in a majority in the electorate. You cannot deny the franchise to the Mohammedans, make a minority of them in electoral power, and then they say, come along and have a joint electorate. The decisiveness of this fact was acknowledged by the Nehru Committee and by 3 members of the Indian Council Committee. Let me, before I conclude, make 1 or 2 remarks to my friends who will not give us adult suffrage. I made it plain at the beginning of my speech that we make the question of the grant of responsible government to India not entirely dependent on this question, although I know that my friends and I are only two in conference of 80s or 90s. We represent 43% million of population, 43 million of people. Dr. Ambedkar sir, this morning I said that I need say regarding the question of franchise, but without prejudice of what I have stated this morning, I should like to examine the suggestions which are put forward before this committee for the purpose of extending the franchise. I take it that this committee is agreed that the ideal is adult suffrage. Some of us think that it ought to be realized immediately. The rest of our friends think that it ought to be evolved by stage. We have therefore put before us two concrete suggestions. Our suggestion is that we should adopt the system of installment and increase the suffrage by graded scheme of 25% addition to the existing voting list, say at an interval of a certain number of years. We have, on the other hand, the suggestions of our noble friends and Marquis of Zetland, in which also effect is sought to be given to some realization of the ideal of adult suffrage. Now, comparing the two, I cannot help saying that I have a particularly for the suggestion of the noble lord, although, as I say, I hold strong that we must have undiluted adult suffrage. If it were a mere matter of choice between the two, I should certainly like to have a system which immediately lays the foundation of adult suffrage, in preference to a system which gives some sort of suffrage to only a class of the people and postpone the fact of itself, government to a large mass for a time to come. But having said that, I cannot, as I say, give wholehearted support to the suggestion, because I find there are certain difficulties, but because I think that the probable and noble twist will come to our help in meeting the difficulties which some of us feel. I propose to make 1 or 2 observations. One thing I see, that if the system of indirect election by the group is adopted, it seems to me the depressed class probably will not fare better under that system. I say that this reason, the depressed classes are scattered all throughout India in small numbers in every village. Their life is practically dominated in all sides by the powerful bodies of the villagers who hold over them social and economic sway. It is possible, and I think it is possible probably, that when this indirect election come to be applied to them, such an amount of pressure may be applied by the village community on the depressed classes that in exercising their role, so to say, in primary election, they may be compelled to select people who may not be their best representative. That is the fear which I certainly have. Another thing which I find is that if this system is to be adopted in preference to the graduated system of extending the vote by installment, I do not understand why we should confine this to the properties class or to any other class. I do not see why we should not extend the system in which a manner that adult suffrage should become the foundation of the system. Dr. Ambedkar, a member, that is intention. A member, that is the intention. Dr. Ambedkar, I am glad to hear that with regard to the difficulties that have been suggested, that this would complicate the matter of separate electorate. I do not think it will be, because with the indirect election you can still remain separate registers for such communities as may be desired to have them. I do not think that will create any difficulty in the matter. But as I say, we cannot, for instance, give support to this principle unless we know really how this principle is going to work in practice, unless we know all the details about it. My concrete suggestion, therefore, is that this committee should appoint a small subcommittee in order to consider the system and to report upon it, so we may be better able, with knowledge and information, to recommend this to a franchise committee that may be thereafter left to work out the system. It seems to me in its raw form, if the noble Lord will excuse my using that expression, it is somewhat difficult, and it is to some of the large order of any one of us speaking at any rate for myself to give our support to this principle.